and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So I'm going to talk to you about global trends, specifically global mega trends, and what the outlook is for beef, particularly Australian beef. Now, demand is complex. As an industry, we often think about supply, the animal we're rearing, and supply, but demand is important too. And demand is an outcome of so many factors. Yes, it's population. Yes, it's income and income growth. It's about the rate of urbanisation and change. It is about those red meat stats. It's supply of Australian beef, US beef, Brazilian beef, but it's also supply of other protein products. It's about consumers. It's about their preferences, their perceptions, what they can afford. Pretty important part of the equation for us, the consumer. And it's about market access. I'm not going to talk about market access at length today, but without it, we have very little, given we export 70% of our beef. So today, 5 mega trends. Now, a mega trend, what do I mean by that? It's when we have a shift, a significant demographic shift, societal shift, or macroeconomic shift, that together they merge together and it starts to impact not just one market but multiple markets. So I'm going to talk about 5 mega trends that I believe have some implications for us in the Australian beef industry. So the first of these is more from less. So what do I mean by that? Well, the world over, and you can't miss this when you open a newspaper, we know we have limited supplies of natural resources, be that minerals, energy, water, and all those food resources that are absolutely essential for human survival and for maintaining our current lifestyles. So data, wherever you look, is revealing that many of these resources are being depleted, and often at quite an alarming rate. But at the same time, population growth and economic growth are placing upward pressure on demand. We want more from those natural resources. And this more from less megatrend explores how companies, governments, communities, and industries such as our own have to discover new ways of ensuring quality of life for both the current and future generations, but maintaining quality of life within the confines of the world's natural limited resources. So big global megatrend. Let's narrow down a little bit. What are we seeing in the red meat industry? So what I have here is some data from MLA's Global Consumer Tracker. You might be sitting there thinking, it's only people in rich countries who are interested in this more from less trend. And what I have here is just some statistics from a couple of our less developed markets. And what we're seeing here is that it's not just consumers in very developed markets, but in developing and emerging markets. They also prefer natural meat, quality food that is produced with minimal intervention. And shoppers are concerned. They're concerned about water pollution, air pollution, deforestation, and rising temperatures. So they are concerned about humans' impact on the environment, and these are linked often to farming practices. So within our industry, areas where this trend is likely to impact, both positively and negatively, include our efficiencies in our on-farm management, our broader sustainability, yield from the animal, and that means leveraging everything that the animal produces, including manure. Now, organic food, which we again often hear about, is part of this more from less megatrend, and the organic food market continues to grow in countries in particular such as China, where consumers do have those grave concerns about food safety. A more recent report by Euromonitor is showing us that there is this sort of shift towards green-minded products, products that have low food miles, or produce raised without pesticides. And this growth towards green-tinged products, it's influenced by some of the weakened economies, recognising that organic food normally trades at a significant premium, but just people's general consideration to wider social and ecological issues. They want to choose products that are not necessarily organic, but products that address their ecological or animal welfare needs. So food trends, particularly these green-tinged ones, are are really important for us. Many of these trends evolve around what's natural. They're part of a consumer eagerness to make more considered purchasing choices. They want to buy from responsible brands or products or countries that can sell them quality products that offer real value and values that align with their own. So the implication for us is we need to continue to promote red meat's inherent natural qualities. And of course, we need to profile our approach to sustainable practices. This leads me to megatrend number 2, great expectations. Now, this is a consumer, societal, demographic and cultural megatrend. It explores the rising demand for experiences over products and the importance of societal relationships. And through all of this, it's all being fueled by technology. Technology, the rise of the smartphone and the rise of mobile commerce, this helps consumers understand more about their products and more about the companies who supply them. And this ability to research means that consumers have an expectation now. They expect companies to be honest and responsible, and it's now very easy for them to expose those who are engaged in dishonest or unethical marketing practices. And again, greatly enabled and nurtured by smartphones. And just a couple of examples here. The world over, again, not just in developed or more wealthy economies, consumers are doing more of their shopping online and through mobile technology. And here, launched in 2011, simply as a chat app in the first instance, WeChat was like the Chinese version of Facebook. Now, this app has moved so much more. It's so much more than that. It's a hub for everything that happens on the internet. It's a platform to find other services, to hail a taxi, to make a doctor's appointment. And for us, in the business of providing goods, it's also a way to seek out referrals and recommendations, not from family and friends, but from the wisdom of others. And just an example of the power of m-commerce and I guess the power of these online referrals and recommendations and just the importance of transparency. A little example there, it's a bit hard to see, but I've got 2 tubs of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. And in the first instance, Unilever, who are the organisation who supply this product, were just looking, to advertise Ben and Jerry's, and they put the product on the website as they would in any other market. But they started to think about this desire, consumer desire for transparency, and they did something very simple. They didn't change any other part of their marketing mix or their sales mix, but they lifted the lid off the product, and they just made the typography a little bit bigger to explain what the variant was. And just a very, very simple example of being a little bit more transparent. Take the lid off the product, tell people what's in it, and sales had a sales uplift of 3.6% there. So really what I'm sharing here, we've got these great expectations and they are being fueled by technology. And the relatively low cost of technology means that consumers the world over are pretty much equal, whether that's a busy street in Sydney, a busy street in Shanghai, somewhere in Jakarta, or Lagos in Nigeria. Consumers can research. They can find out all about products, and they want to connect with products, not that just deliver their physiological needs, but they want to work with products and brands that reflect their values. So, great expectations. So for us, we just need to be very aware of this desire for transparency and the importance of traceability, and we must deliver on our promises. So megatrend number 3 is called the Silk Highway. So coming decades will see the world economy shift from west to east and north to south. There'll be rapid income growth in Asia and to a lesser extent South America and Africa. And as part of this, we will see not millions, but billions of people transition out of poverty and into the middle income classes. So the powerhouses of the new world economy will be China and India. And this economic shift will build new export markets, new trade relations, business models, and of course, cultural ties for Australia. So we're going to just a couple of slides to illustrate some of the changes we might experience within the red meat industry as part of this Silk Highway megatrend. So what I've got here is a closer look at key markets. Now, population size is a really, really quick way to get a sense of markets and market opportunity. So we have many of our key export markets listed here. Now, I want you to keep your eye on China at 1.3 billion. Keep your eye on Korea. And also keep your eye on Australia. So this is just absolute population numbers. But we know that there is a very, very strong correlation between income and income growth and protein consumption that is well established. As we become more affluent, we see more prevalence of the protein in the diet. So population growth is interesting, but what we find more interesting is understanding who has the ability to afford, who can afford to pay for a high-quality Australian beef. And when you start to look at China, there was that 1.3 billion people, but today, around 7.8 million households have the ability to afford high-quality product from Australia. Korea, one of our key markets, 10 million, and Australia at 8.8 million. But in 2 short years from now, you just get a sense of how quickly things will change. In 2 short years, the number of affluent households in China will exceed those of Korea and will almost double that of Australia. Now, you might have been watching the US as I was flicking through these numbers, and what we have here is a good example of the opportunity for us. Both our developed trading partners will remain critically important to us. High population and a high number of households who can afford our product. But there are these wonderful new emerging markets that in a space of 2 or 3 short years are doubling in size, with consumers who have the propensity to pay for high quality Australian beef. But it's more than understanding the countries, their population, their income and their income growth. It's about actually knowing where are those consumers in those countries. Here I have the GDP per capita of a number of cities around the world. Now, Australia is a mighty fine beef producer, but we actually only account for 3% of global production. We can't supply the world. So therefore, what is so important is that we understand not just the attractive countries, but the attractive cities. And within those, the consumers and the customers, what are they looking for? What cuts? How do they cook it? What cuisines? What type of cooking equipment do they have? All of these things are important so we can position Australian beef to realise its full potential and relative premiums in each market. So devil here is in the detail, and we certainly need to understand what the consumer wants and where they are if we are to maximise the opportunities for Australian beef. So it was Megatrend 3. Now, Megatrend 4, this is a little bit of a abstract graph, please forgive me, but what we have here is over a 25-year period, the proportion of the population that is over 65 years of age. And in that 25-year period, Australia's gone from 5% of the population to 15% of the population, and the line tracking above that is an aggregate of the G7 countries. So Australia and many other countries that are part of the G7 or indeed the OEDC have ageing populations. Now, you know, our elderly citizens, our ageing population provides a wealth of skills, knowledge and wisdom, but nonetheless it does present some challenges. And if we think about the domestic market here in Australia, we know we've got this widening retirement savings gap and rapidly escalating healthcare expenditure. And this will have an impact. It will change people's lifestyles, the services they demand, and the structure and function of the labour market. So just looking at Australia a little bit more closely by way of example. In Australia, where nearly 20% of our population is forecast to be over 65 years of age by 2025, expenditure patterns by household are also changing rapidly. So, as I mentioned, health-related expenditure is forecast to grow the fastest, and it's going to overtake expenditure on restaurant and hotel spend just by 2020. That's important for us. Restaurants, hotels remain a premium outlet for Australian beef. And it's not just the Australian market that is seeing this sort of trend. Our major export markets are walking down this path as well. Korea, Japan, China, and some certainly at a faster rate than others, particularly China. So the implication for us, we need to link beef's brand image and messages with health, and we need to explore value-added opportunities, specifically targeting older and in some instances wealthier consumers. This is important now, and it will become critically important in the years ahead. My last megatrend is called fear, uncertainty and doubt. It all started really with the events of September 11 in 2001, when certainly the confidence of the West was absolutely shaken by the events in the US. And just as communities were beginning to regain a level of confidence, we had the global financial crisis, which again had us sort of questioning our faith in banks, governments and other important institutions. Follow this up with the election of President Trump in 2016 and the outcomes of the vote that has led to the United Kingdom leaving the EU. We are living in some uncertain times. We have fake news. What's real news? Who knows anymore? But all of these things, there is a feeling of fear, uncertainty and doubt. Now you're probably scratching your head thinking, so what does this have to do with beef? But when the world starts to feel a little bit out of control, what we see across many, many markets is consumers are looking for what is within their control. And one thing they can do is exercise control over their everyday choices. And food is an everyday choice. It is something within their control. And most recently, there was a study from CSIRO here in Australia. And when asked, thinking about how you could exercise this control and thinking about food, what are you looking for? And 35% of participants were saying more than anything, what they are looking for is country of origin. It is the single most important piece of information on a food label, okay? It's a way of giving confidence and a little bit of control in a world that feels increasingly uncertain. So if we narrow that down to what do we know about beef? And again, from one of Meat and Livestock Australia's global consumer trackers, is this true? Is this what consumers are looking for on beef? And yes, it's absolutely evident in MLA's own tracking. Country of origin matters. And really, what's so important? Country of origin is a proxy. In the absence of all this uncertain information, it's a reminder of quality, food safety, and integrity, and certainly very important for us to continue to promote that in the years ahead. So what does this all mean for demand? So I mentioned up front, demand is a factor of many variables, and today I've briefly walked you through a couple of the big megatrends touching multiple markets. This represents opportunities and indeed some threats for the red meat industry, and it's important that we continue to monitor, reassess, adopt and innovate, and sometimes, where required, reposition the way we talk about Australian beef to realise those opportunities and to achieve relative premiums for Australian beef. But today, those trends are impacting demand for beef. There is absolutely no doubt. Now here, an example from the home market here in Australia. What we have, we ask consumers, and we've been undertaking this study for 10 years now, are you eating more or less red meat? And if less, please give us the single reason why. Why are you eating less beef? Now, it probably won't escape anyone's attention in that current climate. I spoke about fear, uncertainty and doubt. We also know that consumer confidence and affordability is a problem in Australia right now. So price is actually the single biggest reason why consumers are eating less red meat. But what I want to draw your attention to is concerned about the treatment of animals. That's gone from 2% of consumers saying that was the single reason why they were eating less red meat, to now 8% of consumers saying this is the single biggest reason why. Environments remained reasonably static over this period, but again, we're typically seeing 8 to 10% of consumers saying, this is the single biggest reason why I'm not eating red meat anymore. So those megatrends are real. Okay, just as there are the positives around country of origin and that proxy for quality and integrity, some of the things they're concerned about are real as well, and we are seeing that impacting demand. In Australia, we know that young women in particular are most concerned about some of these issues, with around 30% of women aged 18 to 29, really having some question marks for us. The good news is those who claim to know about the beef industry are more likely to be positive and certainly associate our product with quality and good practices. But others are heavily influenced by interest groups. And I'm sure, again, this won't have escaped anyone's attention. There are a number of interest groups. They're growing, they're becoming increasingly sophisticated. They have an ability to attract funds from all sorts of places, including via crowdfunding. And just as technology enables consumers to make recommendations and review, it's a very cost-effective means for interest groups to share their messaging. And I saw some data, February 2018, 52% of consumers in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane have told us that they've seen a message from one of these interest groups within the last week. And, again, all of these things start to impact how people feel about red meat, and perhaps some are not feeling as good as they used to. So how do we win in this very complex environment with those opportunities and threats? It's about making sure that we have research and development around animal health, animal welfare, environmental management, and to identify best practice. It's about ensuring that we have adoption and extension programs that support practice change. And certainly it's around consumer and community engagement. And the producer is a really, really important part of community engagement. Our research also tells us that producers are amongst the most respected and trusted. Consumers want to hear your story, how you're looking after your animals and how you look after the natural resource base. And certainly MLA is seeking to do more of this and building on our existing community programs. More than that, or equal to that, it's important that we have the data. We need data that shows our good practices. We need to be able to collate this. We need to be able to share it with global customers. We need evidence of our good practices. And all of this underpins our market access. So in summary, those global megatrends about sustainability, uncertainty, and those great expectations are absolutely real. There are increasing numbers of consumers who want to know more. They want to know more about where their food comes from. And technology and social media has given a greater voice to consumers and, of course, those interest groups. But the demand is there, the income growth is there, and there is a great demand for natural product as there is for protein. It's very strong in both our developed, so our existing markets and those developing markets. And I certainly believe Australian beef is incredibly well positioned to meet those consumer needs. But as an industry, we need to be ready to address consumer questions. And on that note, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you.